So now, real quick, we're going to look at the rest of the world and see uh, how the European powers are starting to create this colonial world that will soon become an imperial world. Um, you start seeing much more exploration. This really plays into what I've been trying to talk about and let you guys know about the shutting down of China, Japan, and most of the Middle East. They stop any sort of exploration, any sort of sailing out past their comfort zone, and so the Europeans are going to be turning away from the Atlantic and going back to the Pacific once more. And the English are really the major players in this exploration scene, and the most prolific would be Captain James Hook. Sorry, James Cook, not Captain Hook. Captain Cook is going to take three voyages throughout the Pacific. The first one will be this the red here in red, where he explores the coast of Australia. Um, and notices that there's good land there for setting up colonies if needed, and this one will be the one uh, um, where they send the criminals out to basically fend for themselves in what is a godforsaken place where giant monsters live. But that's Australia for you. The second voyage is going to take him close to Antarctica. This is the closest that anyone's going to get to Antarctica. And this is actually going to prove that there is an Antarctica. Antarctica, up until this point, had been sort of this theoretical thing where people were saying, well, if an Arctic pole, there is an Arctic in the North Pole, then it should be fairly clear that there is an Antarctic down at the South Pole, and this is proven true um, by Cook. By Cook going as close as anyone ever has to Antarctica. He doesn't stop there because of the freezing cold. He's afraid of getting his ship stuck, and so he just stays there for a little bit. On his third voyage, he's actually going to get close to Hawaii, and is going to be here in Hawaii that you see him actually perishing. He's going to There's going to be uh, a point where his men are going to kidnap a Hawaiian chief and try to hold him for ransom, and the Hawaiians are going to attack, and Cook will be killed in the ensuing melee, and you really see here that Hawaii, it becomes ripe for the taking as the British come in and take over Hawaii. Other than that, you see Russia beginning to explore as well. You have Vitus Bering, who actually is a Danish navigator. He works for the Russian crown, and he actually navigates between Russia and America. Having the sea named after him, the Bering Sea, that shows that North America and Russia are actually the closest. We're actually extremely close, and just imagine if the Russians had taken advantage of this earlier, or the Chinese or Japanese even had sailed northward into this Bering Sea and gone and into the Bering Strait. But once again, that's counterfactual history. It's not actually what happened. Instead, you have Bering giving the name to a sea, and then later on, whenever scientists find out that are able to discover that this used to be one continuous landmass, this becomes the Bering Strait, or the idea of the Bering Strait, where the Native Americans came from. And so Russia begins to colonize what is now Alaska, setting up small forts and beginning to spread into North America. And also, you have Peter the Great not only exploring into North America, but also expanding into Persia and creating a zone of influence over what is now modern day Afghanistan and Pakistan. So, this idea that the Russians have a foothold in Afghanistan and Pakistan, which will come into play much later on in world history, but it does have precedence. And so, basically, Russia will now have controlling interest in part of the Middle East, and so they will have controlling interest in the Balkans and in the Caspian Sea, and also in the Mediterranean as well. So Russia is beginning to become a power to be reckoned with. So outside of exploration, you're also going to have just a general sense of colonization. Portugal is going to gain full independence from Spain in 1668 after about 80 years of being a joint kingdom. And this is basically our old friend here, Charles II of Spain, who we looked at, who basically loses everything, and Spain is basically no longer a Habsburg empire. Spain begins to lose its dominance throughout the world, and Portugal will take advantage of that by focusing a lot on Brazil. They will begin to colonize even further into parts of the rainforest. You will see a lot more wars between the Spanish and the Dutch. The Dutch will begin to engage in a series of wars against other empires at this time, or other imperial forces, and they're going to be setting up a lot of colonies throughout the Caribbean, in Africa, especially in South Africa, Indonesia, and even North America in what is now New York and parts of Canada. So the Dutch will become basically a pest to colonial powers, as they will invade the areas that have already been have a foothold of a European, as they'll come in and basically try to take over parts of the land that aren't being properly colonized, or they will try to take land away from other empires if they see it. There's a excuse me, if there's a chance that they can take over. And so the colonial powers will begin to be brought into some of the struggles of Europe. You're going to see the French and the British begin to fight against one another, and part of this will lead into North America, where, with especially within the southern colonies and Canadian lands, you will see this. Becoming a hot point of fighting between the French and the British, as here in Acadia and in eastern Canada, as well as in the southern colonies of England, here in what is now West Virginia and Virginia. You'll see, and Kentucky, you'll have fighting between French and English forces, but you'll also have fighting in India as well, especially with the Mughal power completely eroded. The trading companies will exploit this power vacuum, and after the Dutch East India Company is pushed away, the French government will actually try to come in um, and take over from the British, and this will lead to what's known as the Carnatic Wars, which are wars for control of the Indian subcontinent. And this will ultimately accumulate into the Seven Years' War, um, which will basically be Prussia, Great Britain, and Portugal versus France, Austria, and Spain. And if you really want to look at this as the colonial forces having sort of a some sovereignty, then this is actually the First World War. The 7 Years' War takes place not only um, in Europe, in the Americas, but also in India and Indonesia. So you have battles in the Pacific, battles in the Atlantic, battles on three different continents, four different continents with Asia. So this really could be seen as the First World War. And this 7 Years' War, if it's not very familiar to people in the United States under the name the 7 Years' War, instead it's known as the French and Indian War. And in Britain, it's much more important. And they take great pride in this. We're here in the United States; it's not that big a deal because this is before the United States was a place. But the British actually become triumphant and take by taking the French capital in India and Pondicherry, and begin to set up outposts. They defeat the French in the Americas, especially in Canada. We'll discuss this more in class, but in Canada, you see the defeat of the uh, of the French and the ceding of land under the Treaty of Paris of 1763. Um, the French lands are going to go to Britain, and Britain will indeed protect Catholics. So this basically angers a lot of people. The French give up their interest in Eastern Canada, especially, and all those lands go to Britain. And so Britain all of a sudden has all of these different French Catholic citizens, and part of this Treaty of Paris is that the British will protect Catholics, which doesn't sit well at home with a lot of hardline anti-Catholics, and it doesn't sit well actually with colonists in the Americas. They sort of see this as Britain bringing them into war and then basically making them now be friends with the people that they've fought against. And so the British crown will have people um, we'll have people that don't like them on both sides, especially with like the French Canadians in what is now Quebec. The Quebecois, from this point on, will hate the British, and will hate the English speaking government, and make it a point to always try to get away from the other provinces of Canada. But the British are completely triumphant. They've defeated other European powers. And one thing that you should note about the Treaty of Paris is actually George III cut out his allies in this treaty. The war was between Great Britain, Prussia, and Portugal against France, Austria, and Spain. And Prussia and Portugal are actually sort of cut out of this, as are Austria and Spain. Basically, Portugal, excuse me, Great Britain and France are going to negotiate this themselves. Spain will have some say as they are in control of Florida, at least for the time being. Excuse me, but George III will cut out all of his allies, and only the British will survive. Only the British and the French will uh, sign this treaty, and it basically becomes a treaty between Great Britain and France, and the rest of their allies, the rest of the people that fought in this war, have been left out in the cold, and the British have basically now have a empire that stretches out um, throughout most of the North America, and basically throughout the entirety of the world. Um, here is a map of what the British gain here. You have the original British colonies, and all this land they get uh, from the French, and basically Louisiana is all that the Spanish have. The French don't even have that just yet. They will get it later on, but they don't. This is all Spanish land, and so the British are sitting pretty at this point. Even though the British are are victorious and they're doing well, there's going to be a lot of fallout from these wars, especially as the colonies begin to feel the consequences. You have European wars being brought to the colonies, and the colonists are actually being conscripted to fight in these battles, and they're fighting for a vague cause. You know, the wars of Europe are not their own wars. They don't see themselves as that European to completely hate the French, or to really be involved in wars of Europe. So these are very vague causes for themselves. And then of course the Canadian French feel completely betrayed by their own government, and they don't want to be part of the British Crown, as we talked about, the Quebecois. And so the fallout, the main fallout of this war is going to be, of course, the economic toll, as shock of all shock, as taxes are going to be foisted on the American colonists. The American colonists will be taxed for the first time in their entire history after 1763. So basically from 1585 or 1607, depending on where you want to look at it, up until 1763, American colonists had not paid direct taxes whatsoever. They had paid taxes on goods that they bought, but they had actually had to pay income taxes to the British Crown up until this point, and this begins this long march towards war as the colonial forces begin to turn completely away from the British Crown, and the British Crown doesn't really know what's coming to them, because this is the British Empire in 1763. They have, not only do they have the entirety of the British Isles, they also have the 13 colonies in Canada, and now basically the all the way up to the Mississippi, and they also have direct control of Calcutta, and are beginning to take land away from the East India Company, and they have basically taken over the Philippine Isles from the Spanish as well. So the empire now sits really over three different continents, and is only expanding. And so the British are sitting very well, but things don't always last. And pretty soon, for both the British and the Spanish, things are going to start to change in the colonies. And for the French, things are going to start changing at home. Well, that's about all the time we have this week. I kind of hear some trouble a brewing out there, and that's what we're going to be looking at next week. We're going to be looking at the revolutions. We're going to be looking at what happens when the right to rule is upended by things such as the Enlightenment ideas, and also what we talked about this idea of what it means to rule and what it means to be a ruler. So we'll be doing that next week. In the meantime, you guys have a great week. I'll see you all in class. I think it's time to get out of here, Charlie.